introduction. Sounds like you can hear me. I'm here today to present some work that John and I have been doing with some of our fantastic co-authors, Lin and Matthew, or Matt, that we have been working on for many, many years now. I think this is the 10th year that we're working on this project. A lot of data that I'm going to present. So we are going to talk about attention checks. And for those of you who might not know what an attention check is, it's something that kind of sprung out from psychology when psychologists moved from their physical labs where they could control everything that the respondent was doing. They had full attention to, could tell the participant exactly what to do, and they could see whether the participant actually did what they were supposed to be doing. And then they started moving online to collect data because collecting data online is cheaper than having physical lab, but they started to feel like they wanted to regain some of that control that they had in the physical labs. And one of those controlling mechanisms that they wanted to look at was, do people pay attention to the experimental treatments that they submit the participants to? And that's when they kind of started these attention checks, trying to identify which participants pays enough attention and who doesn't pay attention and should not be included into the analysis because they didn't actually participate in the experiment in a way that would be consistent with receiving the mechanisms that the psychologists wanted to increase. So in 2009, at least from my reading of the literature, that's where I could see the first publication of an attention check. It was from Oppenheimer and his colleagues. And since then, it's become widely accepted as a good measure for psychologists and in general survey research as identifying who is paying attention to your survey, who's reading the questions. And as kind of a testament to the popularity, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, one of the top-ranked journals in psych, in 2019, last time we did a literature review of JPSP, we found out that we found that 42% of all the published articles did exclude participants based on attention checks. If the participants failed the attention checks, they were removed from the data and the analysis. So we think, I mean, if it had continued in the same way, if we check it today, that number will probably be higher. So what is an attention check? An attention check is a question that is not really a survey question, often not a survey question at least. It asks participants to somehow report whether they are paying attention. Sometimes there's different types of attention checks. What you see on the screen here is something called an instructed attention check, which we call like a blunt attention check, where we simply ask the participant to perform a task to make sure that they actually are reading the question. So we ask them to help us be sure that your computer is working properly with ours. Please select slightly disagree below. And participants who press slightly disagree are considered to pay attention and succeed on the attention check. Then there are these more subtle kind of attention checks where the instruction is embedded into a text that is trying to trap the participant in. If they just read the first part of that question of the instruction, they would give an answer if they have been what they've been doing on a regular basis. But if they continue and read the whole thing, we say it's also important for you to read the instructions. That's why if you're reading these instructions, you should only select the last option below, leaving all the others blank and indicate in the text box that you read the instructions. Thanks. So people who press the other option would be considered as succeeding on this attention check because they read the whole instruction. And then there's something called manipulation checks, which basically asks participants to report which experimental treatment group they were assigned to. So in this example that I show you here, participants were randomly assigned to either be the sender of a referral to an application, or if they read that the friend was the sender of the referral. So if they were assigned to be a sender and report that they were senders, they would be seen as succeeding on the attention check. And if they were read that the friend was the sender and they reported that, they would be seen as succeeding on the manipulation check. So basically, questions that ask about the specific treatment that they were assigned to. And then one last type that we are gonna look for in this data that I'm presenting here today, ask instead of whether the participant themselves think that they should let the researchers include their data in the analysis or not. So it's kind of a straightforward way of asking, can we trust your data? Did you do a thorough job or not? And supposedly the people who say no, their data should show less of treatment effects, because if they're honest that they didn't pay attention, well, then they should probably not receive the treatment in the proper manner. And the data that we're going to use, that we used for this project, it is a multi-lab study. We were 4 labs that joined in on a project to discover new experimental treatment effects. We got assigned to find 5 each, and before committing to publication, we had to commit to replicate our findings, both by the independent labs. The other labs had to replicate our findings before publishing, and we had to replicate their treatment effects before they were publishing. So we ended up with 100 studies that we administered. We administered them in non-probability samples, and with the requirement that 1,500 of the interviews should be completed with a successful attention check. And we had a requirement that all studies needed an attention check after the experimental treatment were presented. So we ended up with 256,000 respondents across those 100 data collections. Unfortunately, one lab had to delete their data on the people who failed the attention check based on an agreement they had with the survey company. But we ended up with 66 data collections and 194,000 respondents in our data set over those 5 years of data collection. And if we just turn to one thing I should say, each lab could decide on what attention check they wanted, so they could pick their own. So there's natural variation in what kind of attention checks we chose for the different types of studies. And among the attention checks in our data, 60% of the respondents passed and 40% failed, meaning that 77,000 people failed the attention checks and were excluded from the analysis based on our project protocol. And we see that we have data that's ranging from 34% of the whole participant pool succeeding on the attention check up to 87%. Most of the studies had around 60 to 70% of the participants succeeding on the attention check. So a lot of people did not pay attention. So going into the results, did this impact the treatment effects? Let us first look at what happens in the data when we include all the respondents. If we go away from the protocol that we had, saying that we had to exclude all the failing participants, what happens if we include all the respondents that we have? We see that we have 57 effects that were significant. 57 of the newly discovered effects that we replicated did show significant effects between the experimental treatment group and the control groups. So you could see this as a 5% difference percentage point difference between the experimental treatment group and the control group, and 9 effects were not significant. So the question is, what happens when we exclude those failing respondents? If they actually did not pay attention, well, we should see what we expect, an increase of the treatment effect. Do we do that? The answer is not really. Even when we exclude those 77,000 participants who did not appear to pay attention, we see a slightly stronger treatment effect of 0.06 up from 0.05. That is significantly an insignificant increase, but it's a really, really small increase compared to losing 40% of your data. We see that 9 effects were still not significant, but the reason for that is that 2 of the studies became significant when excluding the failing respondents, and 2 became non-significant when excluding the failing respondents. So what happens if we look at only the failing respondents? This is 40% of the sample. We see a weaker treatment effect of only 2% percentage point difference between the treatment and the control groups. 22 of the effects are still significant, even amongst the failing respondents. 5 effects were significant, but in the reversed order, so they showed a negative treatment effects, which seems consistent with some kind of non-attention. And now my time is out, unfortunately. But just the one last point, if we look at moderation, whether the failing respondents and the successful respondents actually differed significantly, we see that 41 of the treatment effects were non-significant, showed non-significant interactions. So we conclude that attention checks gives you some strengthening of the treatment, but it also comes at a cost of losing 40% of the data, or in this case, 77,000 participants who went through our treatments and were excluded from the data. Thank you.